So I'm walking up this old road that has quite a story to tell, because this is a road that had a significant place in American history, although most people don't come down it anymore, as you can see, because it was on this road Dan Shays and his forces were finally caught up with by General Benjamin Lincoln, hero of absolutely no battle in the American Revolution, but in command of approximately 3,000 militia from Boston, really mercenaries under the pay of the banking and merchant elite and the governor, treacherous Governor Bowdoin of Massachusetts. Shays and his men had taken up arms and marched on the armory, knowing that Lincoln was getting closer and closer. I don't really think they wanted bloodshed at all, but had decided, as Benjamin Lincoln's men got closer and closer to the Springfield region, Western Mass's Pioneer Valley, as they got closer and closer, Dan Shays had to basically, as they say today, shite or get off the pot. He had to do something. Was he going to disperse his men? Bowdoin had basically, the governor had basically declared them to be rebels and had prices on their heads. Was he going to disperse his men and let them fend for themselves, or was he going to try to stand up for the just cause that he felt his men were fighting for? And he had gone for the armory. He'd walked right into a neighbor and friend of his second in command, Luke Day, and this neighbor and friend is General William Shepherd of Westfield, who had previously allowed the Shayites, after a little bit of a demonstration, to march through his militia and close the courts. Maybe that was what they expected here. But in the case of what happened at Springfield, Shepherd had fired a warning shot first over the head of the Shayites, and then he had fired grape. That grape shot had taken the lives of 4 of Shay's men almost immediately, wounded nearly another 30, and this had basically led to cries of murder going up from the Shayites as they ran in all directions, but especially to the north and east to escape Shepherd's guns. Shepherd had betrayed his region. He'd betrayed his home. He'd betrayed his community. It was completely unexpected. The bleakest time in the forests of the Northeast, and especially western Massachusetts, would be late January. The sap isn't running in the trees yet. There's no life other than a few mushrooms, if you know what you're looking for, and maybe some moss, if you can find it. And in January of 1787, the snow blanketed the ground very thickly. And Dan Shays, Luke Day, Eli Parson, and a couple thousand Shayites or regulators were moving north out of Springfield, shocked that their neighbor and former commander in the American Revolution, General William Shepherd, had fired into the crowd that had such a just cause, a cause squarely aimed at the bankers and merchants of eastern Massachusetts who were foreclosing on community members at an alarming rate. Shepherd had fired grape and took 4 lives in doing so. The Shayites moved north into South Hadley, and somewhere in Hadley they ran into the Hadley militia, who had become what you might call encouraged as a result of what they had heard had happened in Springfield, and they would stand and fire on the Shayites, taking another 4 lives. The Shayites would continue moving north that day. After the incident at Hadley, they spent the night in the horse caves. They expected that they would find aid from friends and neighbors along the way, but it seemed like everybody had turned against them. They turned against themselves that night when stragglers coming up behind them ran into their rear guard and were shot down. They had then come back together, if you will, and begun a march north toward Pelham, Shay's home turf. It was in Petersham, and not that far up this road, that Benjamin Lincoln and his forces, who had gotten to Springfield and then proceeded hard on the heels of the Shayites, caught up with them and basically completely dispersed Shays' force. Many fled into Vermont, many more to New York, many were captured, a few were killed. It was a really small engagement, really. But the Shayites were literally freezing by this point. I bet you there were a lot of them that were almost glad it was over, because they had been, I mean, these are farmers, and yeah, in January, there's that angst that you get, that cabin fever feeling. It's easy when you're sitting in an inn or around your fire to think about the things you need to do. And I'm not saying that there weren't some veterans in and among the Shayites. There were a lot of them. But there were also a lot of farmers who, you know, it's easy to be a hero around your own fire. But when you're outside in frigid temperatures, and the temperature was reported to have gotten below 0 that night, the fire tends to come out of your belly really quickly. And the Shayites, caught by Lincoln, were quickly dispersed. Now, Lincoln's story of the engagement is quite suspect. He exaggerates his own role. And, you know, it's kind of funny because after the engagement, he very quickly disperses the army. His 3,000 mercenaries are going to go home pretty quickly. And General Shepherd and the Western Mass militia are going to be left to pick up the pieces. So I feel like when you read Lincoln's accounts, I think that there's quite a bit of exaggeration. I mean, he was a guy that needed to do something to raise his reputation. Ultimately, the Shayites are going to disperse out of Massachusetts completely. Most are going to end up in Vermont or in New York. Claimed by both New York and New Hampshire, Vermont was a no man's land, and that's where a lot of Shayites ended up. And interestingly, the last action of the war would be on the border of New York. And that's what we're going to check out next in our next field trip, where we're going to learn about the events surrounding the Battle of Sheffield. And it's kind of a cool story that doesn't get told that much.